Step outside.
G'day, Anatol. Thank you all for being with us this evening. We are so excited. But before we get started, let's take a moment to offer our honoring and acknowledgement for the traditional owners of these lands, Oga Hoga Owinge, also known as Santa Fe, and to give a special shout out to all the ancestors in the lands you all come in from. This evening, we have a very special event with two very extraordinary women. We have Julia Hardaker and Julianne Croft, who took positions as Australian volunteers in Afghanistan in 2004. Together, they have run their consultancy businesses, providing governance, leadership training, and capacity building with remote Indigenous community boards in the Northern Territory in Western Australia. With a school winning the Northern Territory Chief Minister's Award for Excellence in Governance. Please welcome Julia and Julianne.
Thank you for having us. We're so honored to be here.
Thank you. We are in disbelief that you're even here. So this is amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll get on with our questions?
Thank you. But before I start, we always at home in Australia say this. I too honour the traditional peoples of the lands upon whom we meet, both past, present and future. And we thank you for having us on your land.
And I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land upon which we meet this evening. And thank you for having us.
Okay, so just quickly a little bit about me. Grew up in a small country town in New South Wales, Australia. And my first career was actually as a registered nurse, and I worked in all sorts of fields in nursing, from surgical to medical to palliative care and aged care, etc. I got pretty burned out and went off into the not-for-profit sector, working in women's organisations, domestic violence, helping women have better lives in the New England area of New South Wales, and then went off into working with youth, doing the same and developing services. Then in a moment of what I thought was insanity at the time, Julianne and I accepted positions as Australian volunteers in Kabul, Afghanistan. And I had a couple of roles there. My first role was to establish a capacity building department and train up a team of people, develop their peace building package. And I was doing peace studies, actually, trying to online from Afghanistan and study at the same time. That was trick. And then my second role was with the Afghan Women's Resource Centre, doing change management, helping them move all their refugee programs back from Pakistan to Kabul. We were in a very bad car accident over there, and I was severely injured, and I was medevaced back to Australia. But when Julie finished her term, she can talk about that, we moved up to Tennant Creek, which is smack bang in the middle of Australia in the desert. So I'm loving the desert areas of New Mexico, I have to say. And I took up a job as an op shop manager. An op shop is like a thrift store here. It turned out to be the best thing I could have done for that year while I was recovering. I'll share about that later, because it led me into a job working with women out in remote communities, which was actually a childhood dream. And we talk about allies later, but I don't know why. I was a white kid from the little country town, but I had this dream of being out with women in the desert doing bush tucker and bush medicine. I never knew that dream would come true, but it did through that position. After a few years there, I became the CEO of AMREC, which is Animal Management in Rural and Remote Indigenous Communities, which took me out to remote areas, walking and working with Indigenous peoples, our First Peoples, all over Australia, which was just huge and a huge honour. And again, I got myself all burned out after about 7 or 8 years and had a rest, and then joined Julie and her consultancy. So that's a little bit on what led me to here.
That sounds fascinating. I can't, there's no words for what you've done. And great. Okay, let's hear from you.
Thank you. Well, I grew up on a sheep and cattle property in the New England area of New South Wales, Australia. I think the New England there is very similar to your New England state of New England here. So to give you some idea, that's why they call it New England. Lots of deciduous trees and beautiful green pastures. Then I was a musician, and I worked as an arts educator for a number of years with the Department of Education in New South Wales, in my state, and was in the Performing Arts Unit, was designing a lot of programs for students across the state, particularly for students in remote areas and kids in disadvantaged areas. I wanted to really get a quality arts education across to them. So that's what I focused on there. We also did things like the choral concert series at the Opera House and getting mass choirs together to do those kinds of things and instrumental festivals. Then I left the department and went back to university and studied policy, did a master's in policy, public policy, and then met Julia. And then we went to Afghanistan together as Australian volunteers, as she's mentioned. And while I was there, I was the policy and planning advisor to what was the largest Afghan organisation, non-government organisation in Afghanistan. It was called the Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance, and it provided a lot of social services. It provided agriculture, infrastructure, health, education, and civil society building across 17 provinces of Afghanistan, which was over half of the country because the government was pretty dysfunctional. So this organisation, which was the oldest and largest organisation in the country, was providing these services. It had over 5,000 people and employees, and it was a fascinating, incredible journey. It changed my life. And after Afghanistan, we were actually in Afghanistan for 2 years, and after that came back to Australia, and we both worked in Indigenous affairs, but in different areas. I first of all worked for the government, for the federal government. We have the same system as you. We've got a federal government system. And I was a solution broker for the federal government, working in an Indigenous coordination centre in Tennant Creek, which is in the middle of the desert. And it was a huge region, the second largest municipal region on the planet. Hundreds of thousands of square kilometres and 17 remote Indigenous communities. And while I was there, it was about working with communities to work out what their needs were, what they identified needs were, and then meeting those. And for example, we started the Wununjikari Music Centre, and that was because men came into the centre and said, we need a space for our young kids who are on the streets drinking and drugging, and we want a space for them to come off the streets and play music. And so we started the Wununjikari Music Centre, which is still going today and has won lots of awards. It's a recording studio, and it records a lot of Indigenous artists. So that was a wonderful experience there. And other things like community wanted an internet cafe, for example. So we started up that and facilitated the development of that. So that's just a couple of examples of that. Then I had a job with Outback Stores, which is a company that was supported by the government to provide food security for remote Indigenous communities across Australia. And this was really needed because a lot of the stores had been run by white fellas from the eastern seaboard of Australia and had been run down, and there was just things like just pies and Coke in the shop. And so we took over these stores, negotiated with the community to provide really healthy foods. And that's what we did. And I really loved that job. I was the wellbeing manager there, and my role was to keep the fellas. I was the only woman on the executive there, and my role was to keep the retailers, focused on health outcomes. And it was wonderful. I really want to say this because just seeing kids in communities, for example, who's, with poor hair, skin, health, a few months later after having proper food security, which is a constant supply of, ongoing supply of nutritious food, going back to the communities after a few months and seeing people get well, seeing their hair shiny, their skin shiny, it was just the most wonderful, experience job to be involved with. So I really loved that. And then Julia and I came together in our consultancy. Well, I started a bit in my consultancy first, and did a whole range of things across different communities in Australia. But the work that Julia and I did together in our forward thinking consultancy was really focused. The main one was in Goombalanya, which is in East Arnhem Land, which is up near the Kakadu National Park in the very northern part of Australia. So that's just in a nutshell some of the things I've done, broad brushstrokes, Tash.
Julianne, that is, again, it sounds like you are really a strategist in a lot of ways, not just a visionary, but also a strategist. And Julia certainly knows how to get the PR happening and get in with the folks. And
That's spot on.
The same, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about right now, we have those same needs here in America, in Indigenous communities, and too much soda pop and candy. And nutritious food is a necessity, and we do know how to do it. So it's good that you're doing that. As we move along with this, Julia, this is for you. Can you give us an outline of your experiences working in other cultures, including Indigenous cultures?
Well, an outline of my experiences. I would be here all day sharing those experiences. We were talking today to another friend, and there are so many really key stories that I could give you here that tell about the importance of relationships and trust and time. And I guess I'm thinking of it more from the point of, how did I come to do this? And I remember many years ago, I was working with Ann Wilson Schaaf, who lived in Montana, and she knew a fellow from my area, and I had the privilege of bringing Uncle Reuben Kelly, who was the last high priest of the Dungari people, over to the White Buffalo ceremony in Montana. But before that, I had come to know him, and I said to him one day, Uncle Reuben, what are the answers? How do we get, black and white working together? How do we solve all these multiple complex issues in Australian society? And, I need your help. And he said, okay, invite me for dinner. And I said, oh, okay. I said, what do you like to eat? He said, pizza. So I got pizza, and he brought his son and his daughter, and we all sat around, and I was so excited at the end of it. I thought, I'm going to find out the answers, and I'm going to find out how to do this, go and work with Indigenous peoples. And at the end of dessert, I said, so come on, spit it out, tell me all this good news. And he said, this. He said one word. He said, this. And I got it, that it was about sitting down and sharing food and getting to know each other. And I never, ever forgot that. And I took that with me into my work, always having food, always the invitation to sit and share. And, to go and work remotely, I had to learn so much. I came with all my biases and preferences and presumptions, and I've had to learn how to listen. I've had to learn how to do a lot of things. I've had to learn how wrong I am in many situations. I've had to ask for mentorship from key people in communities that I've worked with. I've had to understand the truth about our awful Australian history, and Julie can talk really well on this, about colonisation and its effects. I've had to be able to take that information to my relatives, my friends, my community, and help people understand better, and understand truths. As I said, I could just share so many stories with you about that, but I think I'll hand over to Julie for a minute, and maybe you talk some more to that. And we'll probably be interjecting a bit here because we've worked together for so long. We're used to it.
Yeah.
Please, absolutely. And
we've touched, and you mentioned, and we've touched upon some of the work that we've done in with governance and things like the Wurundjeri Music Centre, and creating a board for the community and governance, and also writing policies and procedures for Indigenous workers, for example. which is nothing like a sort of procedure manual that you'd find for white fellas. It's completely about negotiating and talking, listening, finding what's really appropriate, really getting to the heart of what this need is, what this culture is. And I mean, look, I just want to explain, working with Indigenous communities, I mean, the very first community I went into is Owatilla, which is right in the middle of the Barkly region of the Northern Territory. And, I was working for the government, and I came with all of these, Julia talks about it, coming with assumptions and presumptions. And I sort of went through I thought, I've gone through all the right protocols. I've spoken to the right traditional owners and the right women and the people. And I went out to hundreds of kilometres, drove out to this community on this dusty track with a four-wheel drive. Got there, and I thought, and I'd arranged to meet the women outside the women's centre. So I sat outside there. And there was at the time that we'd arranged, and there was nobody there. Nobody turned up. And I sat there, and I was freaking, and I was thinking, oh, we've got to meet this, we've got to do this and this and this and this. And I just went, Julianne, stop. Just stop and be. And I stopped and I thought, and as I was sitting there, it was like, I get really emotional about this because it's so important. It was like I could physically feel my Western prejudices and all of my Western conditioning just falling from my body, falling from my mind and my body. And I just went, just stay here, just be, just sit. Don't come with any expectations. Don't think I know anything. And after I'd been there for about half an hour, I saw this beautiful black queen. She looked like a queen walking across the desert, the paddock, slowly coming towards me. Her name was Millie Mick, and she sat down beside me and we started talking. And I didn't talk about anything to do with what I'd left my agenda behind. I just went, let fly away. And I just sat there talking to Millie, and then we just talked about our families and, just everything, just started to get to know each other. And then about half an hour later, there was these hand movements, which is gone. And then next minute, there was a few more women came, and we sat down and started talking. And then we talked for another half hour or so. And then I saw these hand movements again, which is they talk, from far away, they have hand movements and come in, and they have language in hands that they can use from long distances. And the next minute, there was all these women around the centre there. And we just talked for hours, and we put the billy on. That's in Australia, that's the like a kettle, but you put it on a fire and boil the water and make a cup of tea. We just put the billy on, sat round, had some bickies, and we also put IES on the end of things in Australia. I mean, biscuits, Anyway, so we had some tea and bickies, and we were there for hours, and we just started to get to know each other. That's what working in communities has to start from. Me acknowledging that I know nothing. I know nothing about this culture. This was a Warlpiri mob, and I knew nothing about Warlpiri peoples. It turned out in the end that Millie Mick became my skin mama, and and we should talk about that just a little bit, Julia, because that's another important thing working in communities. If you would like us to talk about that, yeah.
What does skin mama mean?
I'll just while I'm on Millie, because I kept on going out to that community, and we worked on different projects and things that they needed, not my agenda, not what I thought the people needed, what they needed. And after being out there for it was about a year, I think, and every time I'd go out, I'd sleep in this old dong, what they call dong, is an old sort of van thing, and I'd always ask Millie to come in and have a meal with me every time I went out there. This one night she said, hey, Julie, I think it's time for you to have a skin family. And I said, because I'd known about this, because you have to have a place. Unless you're part of the family, you shouldn't really even be there.
No, you don't belong.
You don't belong. So I said, I'd be so honoured. And she said, just wait there. So I waited for a quarter of an hour, and then she knocked on the door. I opened the door, and there was this sea of faces. It was in the evening. The sun was setting, and her whole family was outside. And she went round and showed and introduced me to my sisters, to my mother-in-laws, to my cousins, to the whole family. And I had a place in there. She gave me my name, Numbanjimba, and actually Julia and I think we're sisters-in-law, aren't we?
Sister-in-law, because I'm Napangadi.
Yeah. And so, that was so important, because then we belonged, and then we could actually, acknowledge that we knew nothing. And Millie was my mentor. She taught me so much, and I asked her to let me know if I was making any faux pas or if I was doing the wrong thing. Millie was there to show me. And that's really significant. You know, you talk about your
yes.
skin, Mum.
Well, during my time volunteering in the op shop, in the thrift shop, this beautiful woman came in, and she was very old. She was 85, which is very old for Indigenous women in those communities.
Traditional healer too.
And a traditional healer, and there's another whole story about that for another day. But she took me into her family, and her name was Bunny Naparula, and she gave me my skin name, Napangadi, which in the kinship system, yes, as Julie said, makes me her sister-in-law. I learned very quickly that white fellas, which they're called, or
what we call white fellas.
We're called white fellas, or Ballada, in the Arnhem Land area in particular. They call a lot of white fellas seagulls. They're people white. They're white. They fly into the community. They flap all about.
They drop shit.
They drop shit. They try to look important, and then they fly out, and they have no connection to people. We weren't seagulls. We had family. We had place, and we were invited into the community. And one thing white fellas are good at doing is working out what Indigenous peoples need. You know,
yeah,
they think they do. And in my time in Amric, every single time I'd get a phone call from some white council or shire saying, you need to get your vets out here and clean up all the dogs. You know, the answer always was, what do the elders and the people in the community want? And if you want me to come there, you fly me there so that I can sit down under a tree in the dirt and ask, what do people want in terms of, you know, their animals being cared for? Because many animals are people's dreaming. They are their totem and their dreaming.
Like spirit dogs.
Like spirit dogs. And, you know, I wouldn't go in unless the community wanted us there.
And can I just elaborate on your role there, Julia? Because Julia was the head of this organisation that used to get teams of vets in there to, you know, either euthanize dogs or desex them. I had this joke that whenever she went into a community, the dogs would cross their back legs. But
that's not nice, is it?
but Julia, it's about working with the communities, as she said. You know, sorry, Julie, to interrupt. I just wanted to. It was an enormous program, and getting teams of vets to come into the middle of nowhere, the Tanami Desert, you know, all over these communities across Australia, was an extraordinary feat, because that was helping the health of humans. The health of dogs impacted on the health of humans, and it was a really significant program.
Yeah.
Tell about that old man dog.
I don't know. Are we going okay for time?
Yeah, we're doing good, and I just posted something on Facebook about that on the Navajo reservation as well, because we have a lot of dogs that need homes and all kinds of care. So yeah, thanks for touching on that.
One of the earliest lessons that I had about how to work with Indigenous peoples is to remember that they are human, like white people. You know, we're all human, because a lot of people aren't treated that way. And an example that I could use, which is another story, was in a remote community one day. We were going around door to door. We always had local people take us around door to door to ask people, how could we help them? How could we help their dogs? And we got to a house one day, and there was an old man, and his dog, unfortunately, had been hit by a car. It was very badly injured. And he wanted us to fix the dog, and we didn't have those facilities, you know, remotely. And we told him the only way we could help his dog was by alleviating the pain and putting the dog to sleep. And he said, no, it's a spirit dog. You can't touch this dog, which is pretty challenging for veterinarians, because under Australian animal welfare laws, they're not allowed to leave an animal like that. So I said, this is about this community. You know, you have to put all your white laws away, and we have to work with this man and respect where he's at and where his dog is at. So this went on. Every day we would go back and see how the dog was, and every day the dog was worse. And finally he said to me, you can take my dog away and put it to sleep, which we did. And out remote, once those dogs have had that green dream injected into them to put them to sleep, we have to have them buried very deep in the ground so animals don't dig them up. And I know this is gory, but it explains very well what I'm trying to talk about. Anyway, the next morning, he came over to the veterinary clinic and he said to me, "Where's my dog? I want my dog." And we had put the dog to sleep and I nearly died. You know, I thought, oh my God. And he said, I want my dog. And we had to send somebody out to the tip and dig the dog back up. And I cleaned the dog off and took it around to his house on the back of a ute, a utility truck. And he leant forward and he just put his hand on his dog and held it there for a moment because he was saying his own words to his dog and saying goodbye. And then he turned around and walked away. And I was left absolutely almost ashamed of myself because I did not ask. I didn't ask when we put your dog to sleep, what do you want us to do with it? And I saw my own racism and my whiteness in there because would I have said that to somebody who'd come into a veterinary clinic in my little town? Probably would not have. And so that dear old man, he taught me a lot about respect and asking and being clear. And yeah, so I carried that for the rest of my days working remotely. Yeah, a very touching lesson.
Oh, yeah. Remote is really remote in Northern Territory. We had the honor of going to Uluru this last December, January, and had some very profound experiences on the land, in the land, with the land, and of course with the people. And you have to know. And anybody watching, if you ever get an opportunity, please take a trip out to Northern Territory. Go to Uluru, go to Alice Springs, go to Tennant Creek, and but be guided in with some guidance. It's not. I would not recommend going anywhere without knowing anything. You have to go in a good way. In a good ways to be invited, really. So the next question I have. Thank you for that. That is. Very touching. I've gotten very soft when it comes to four-leggeds. I have two cats here in the house, and they're my world. They are my world. So it's clear that both individually and together you are allies of the Indigenous peoples you have engaged with, and this has paved the way for you to be positive change agents. What does it mean to you to be an ally? A lot of people ask me, how can we be an ally? Help us understand that.
Okay, that's a wonderful question, Tash. Thank you. And we've sort of touched on it already with the shedding of our Western ideas and realizing that we know nothing about a culture when we move into it. But I think, you know, what it has meant for Julia and I is that it boils down to two words, really: respect and listening. And I mean deep listening. In Wiradjuri mob language in New South Wales, they have a word for deep listening, which is dadiri. And that is imperative. To be an ally, first of all, you need to understand, you need to know how to practice dadiri, deep listening. And it goes without saying, really, respect. But a lot of people, you know, white fellas go into communities and don't have that respect. So that's the first thing. But it's got several facets to it, really. We've talked about not having an agenda, our agenda, you know, but going in and finding out what the community's agenda is and working with that. That's being an ally. Doing, you know, there's a certain sort of, there's a facilitation. We go in as facilitators, which means that we don't go in there saying, oh, well, you need to put this program in here and let's do it this way. It's about facilitating. What is it that you need? If perhaps sometimes it is that they don't have experience of working with white fellas in the bureaucracy. So they might ask us if we could take on that role to advocate for whatever it is that they want us to advocate for them. That's a part of it as well. But it's really about two-way learning. It's about being immersed in the culture, learning as much of the language as possible, which is really hard when you're working through quite a few different communities and different languages, but learning the language, but two-way learning, listening, learning, and then if we having a true exchange, cultural exchange, not a sort of, I don't know, a textbook one. People talk about it in textbooks a lot, but this is about actually being there. I mean, look, being an ally, the cultures in Australia have been there, the oldest cultures in the world. 60,000 years these cultures have been there. 60,000 years of learning. What would I know? You know, and when white fellas have only been there for just over 200 years. So when it's about being an ally to our first Australians, it's really about coming with saying, look, I want to know, I want to learn. And that's hard because of the 60,000 years of knowledge, accumulated knowledge and wisdom. You know, I just want to talk about that day when we went out with our skin mothers. Julia and I had our skin mothers together because they were both friends, and they said, let's go bush. So we went bush. And, you know, we go past, there's millions of trees out in the desert, millions of trees, all these stunted, you know, gum trees out in the middle, eucalypts in the middle of the desert. And we go past, bush bashing in this truck. And they're talking in language, and I said, oh, what are you talking about then? And they said, oh, that old poor old fella, that tree, he's just been damaged. Now, I just went, how do you know about that one tree? How could you know about that one tree amongst all these millions of trees out here? But that's a concept to me that I just have to stop and try and get my head around. That's just too much information for me to understand. It was like when we went out there digging for sweet potatoes in the middle of the desert, they told us stories. This is about being allies too, is listening to their stories, listening to, and as Julia said, listening to the hard stories too, the truth about what's happened in the past and acknowledging it and being there. And I just had this feeling, Tash, that it was like this other dimension it was like another dimension, like the fourth dimension, I don't know, another dimension. There was like a big lake, an ocean, and I was there, and that was their dimension, and I'd only just put my little toe into it. I could feel it being there. I could feel that it was there, but I just knew that I just knew this little much about it, and I was just, you know, really wanting to be a sponge and take it in and learn more. But, you know, that takes time. You know, 60,000 years of accumulated knowledge is a lot of knowledge, and people just carry that with them. And it's like we come in with all of our culture and, you know. So anyway, I don't know whether that's answered your question, but that's some of the elements of being an ally, you know.
And I was just going to add that for me, being an ally is all that Julie said. And it also means that there are times when I actually have to take action. I have to take a side. And you know, there's been many examples of that. But one example is, you know, we were walking a thin line because we were employed by the Department of Education or funded to undertake this work. And yet we were there for the community, for them to have their say in how they were going to govern their school. And so we weren't either. We were walking in the middle line. And there were so many times when people would be talking in language and they would make a decision, and then someone else would walk in the room with a white fella with authority, and suddenly they would acquiesce to this white power. And then it was our role to go, hang on, and be getting back with them and saying, now remember you made this decision, and helping and encouraging that decision to evolve and actually come out, and for their decision to be the one that was going to be sitting on the table that day. So, you know, taking action to support that is
that's being an ally for sure.
Yeah.
It's a big part of it.
I was thinking when you were saying the word in language, deep listening, I was thinking deep listening is not just the auditory, the linear English words coming in whatever dialect or vernacular that's coming in, but the deep listening is the feeling and the seeing with heart and mind. and feeling all the around what's going on, the context, all around this
Absolutely.
person, and the facial, the body movement, the body language, everything, and just trying to just be open and taking that, like
Open.
the sound coming into ear is just a little part of it, of the whole of listening
You've got
in
it.
the environment. That means being, out back, like you say, in the bush bashing. And
Absolutely. That's really spot on, Tash. And I just
yeah.
want to, just following on from that, I want to tell you about something that happened to me. I was out in Gumbalanya, actually doing some helping with the ladies translate this governance guide into Kunminku language. And I had to meet up with a woman the next day and go off to another house. But anyway, I was waiting. When I woke up that morning, something was different. I couldn't work out what it was. I just thought, something's different here. And then I thought, well, it's so quiet. It's really so quiet. And I thought, and I worked out that the birds weren't singing. I thought, what's going on? Because this community was next to a huge billabong, massive. In the wet season, you have to fly in because it's just wet everywhere, wetlands everywhere. And so this billabong is massive.
Billabong.
Yeah, billabong is a big, huge expanse of water, like a lake, but it's a shallower. There's all these birds there, like water birds and tree birds, grass birds, all that, massive birds. And every morning they'd wake you up. This morning I woke up with the sun, but there was no birds. And when Camilla came to pick me up, I said, "What's going on?" I said, "There's no birds singing." She just said to me, "Last night a young man took his life. And when people take their lives, the birds stop singing." Now, I'm just saying that because, people say, "Oh, yes, Indigenous people got such strong connection to the land." Well, this goes back to this 60,000 years of knowledge and culture. I mean, it's like everything is one. When we say connection to the land, we have no idea what that really means. That's just one little example of it. It's like everything is connected. Everything is connected. Those birds knew, and there was a connection there. And that happened not just that once. Whenever that happened, the birds would stop singing.
That is definitely very profound and deep.
Yeah, that's part of Didiri, is knowing that there are these many, many, thousands of years of culture. And just to get a glimpse of it, I feel honoured to even just get a glimpse of that, to have experienced some of that,
It's believe me, I've been there like a few times and been so touched every time, just meeting the elders and seeing the innocence of the children, and all in between, the intergenerations and all that other stuff, that intervention being one. But that was, I think, when we went in 2007. That was a long time ago, but we probably won't have time to talk about that tonight. Let's go on to the next question. So it seems that being an ally underpins your working methodology. Can you go into this with more depth?
Well, I believe we don't go out there and work for or with, really. I believe it is that two-way process. We walk together on the journey of learning, and we always have mentors. And I have to know that even though I know nothing in our First Nations world, I do know things in my world, and that I have that to share, and that everything can be put on the table so that we have two-way learning and we walk together. But what I do know may not be applicable, may be applicable. All I can do sometimes is share experience, strength and hope that we've had in other communities, and drop little seeds and see whether those seeds are going to grow or not. And
not be attached to the outcomes if they don't.
Not be attached to the outcomes, that's right. And a lot of the time, people are talking in language. We don't know really what's going on. We have to sit and wait for that information to be fed back to us so that we can understand what's happening. And do you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's about being present,
Yeah.
Being fully present, Dadiri indicates that as part of that. But, I mean, if we talk about methodology, one of the prominent methodologies in working with developing countries, for example, has been participatory development. So it's a bottom-up approach, and it's about participation of the community, giving a voice to people who've been least heard and getting various people's opinions and working that way. Yeah, wonderful. But even with that, there's still often people from Western nations, European nations or Australia or New Zealand or wherever, who go into developing countries and they have their own agenda. All right, we're coming in here, we're going to put all these water wells in, or we're going to approach this or fix this or fix that, do that, and then we'll have this participatory development. Oh, isn't this wonderful? Because we've got the whole community talking about it. But that's actually still going in with an agenda. So we wait until we're invited to go into a community. And when people clearly know what it is that they want us to be there for. We're not going in because the government says, oh, you've got to go out here and do that. No, not at all. In fact, when I've worked with organisations, like, for example, Barclay Regional Arts wanted me to go and do their strategic plan and their business plan, 5-year business plan, and Mununjikari is part of that. And I said, well, is this what people who work in Mununjikari want? Is this what they say they want and what they need? Yes. I said, okay, if I come out there, I want to come out there for 10 days before I even work on the plan with you. I want to come there for 10 days so that I can get round to all of those communities and sit in the dirt and listen to what people want and what they need. That is non-negotiable, And if you haven't got that, well, that's okay. Won't do it. But we need to actually listen to people, talk to people. You just don't go in there. People often, white fellas, they impose their own structures, they impose their own belief systems, they impose their own agenda, and it just doesn't. That's not what we're about. So I guess the methodology that we work is more like that. It's sort of a combination of participatory development in a sense, but it's about that going in there, to stating what it is that we need to work. Like when we first got the job at Gumbalanya, that's an interesting saga in itself. Talk about that, Julia.
Well, we were interviewed for the position, and we basically said at the end of the interview, you're 4 people interviewing us. What does the community think of us? We suggest that you invite us up there and let us just sit and spend time with people so that they can see whether we've got the right heart for the job. And they loved that immediately, and that's why we got the job. But sometimes, methodology, it's such an interesting word. And it just struck me that, I can have something written and planned, and then I can get out to a community. And the methodology for that day will be, the ladies will say, oh, let's not do any of that today. Let's just get in the car and go out bush and go and collect bush tucker and bush medicine, and let's just do that.
Or go hunting.
And that's the methodology for the day.
Yeah.
And, what comes out of that can be surprising. It's not the structure or the methodology that I thought in my head we might be doing. It'll be something entirely different with really beautiful outcomes.
And that goes from the beginning to the end of any work that we do with communities. I mean, and it takes time. Like we spent 7 years developing a remote Indigenous board, public school board, with all Indigenous members, and 7 years, of going there 4 times a year for 7 years, and sometimes for periods of 2 weeks. So, it's a slow process. You can't rush anything.
No, and in fact, the metaphor that community uses for this work is the turtle.
That's their totem.
Is their totem, because the turtle takes slow steps.
And the whole process, yes, from beginning to end, and that's even with the reporting. If we have to report back to a government or an agency or whoever's engaging us, the reports might say, went bush, went hunting. The ladies wanted to go hunting. Or the men wanted us to do this, or so we did that. We're just completely honest. This is what we do, So it's an interesting record of what happens. But a lot of people, again, people have these ideas of what reports should be. It's outcomes driven. No, we just set all of that aside. Forget about that. This is what we did. This is what we're doing. So it makes it a lot simpler too.
It's community driven.
Yeah.
You got my vote. I mean, that's the way to go. You know, the other day I went in to have a meeting, an agenda with a professional, and I was exactly that. I said, you know, I don't want to do any of that. Can we just sit and have a yarn? Let's just sit and talk, and let's just drink some water and just be. And
Yes.
that's what it was, because that's where I was. I didn't want an agenda, and so it was nice that she was willing to do that. So thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that. So there are many typical ways with colonization in which colonization continues to affect Indigenous peoples across the globe. But tell us about how colonization presents in Indigenous communities in Australia.
Wow.
That's a big question, Tash.
Well, for a start, one of the things that you'll observe if you go into a remote community is that a lot of the people in the stores and the council offices and the clinics and everywhere else are white. Occasionally, you find communities where you'll see smiling black faces, but there's predominantly still white employment. That's just straight up if you were driving into a community, but I'm sure Julie can
Well,
add to that.
and white people who are not prepared to actually do themselves out of a job, because that was our role. Like Kumbalanya, we just said, right, we need an exit strategy here. The thing is to do yourself out of a job so that those skills then are there and they're really solid in a community. But a lot of white people go there from the eastern seaboard of Australia, where most of the population is, who probably wouldn't get a job, to be frank, in the eastern seaboard, and they go to remote Indigenous communities to get good money, and they do an absolutely appalling job at what they do, like the stores that I was talking about before, that they ran them into debt and, you know, nothing in there, not good food. So that sort of thing. But that's one aspect for sure. But I mean, it's the typical characteristics of colonization, like intergenerational trauma. And I have to say, it's getting worse, because, you know, when it's untreated trauma, then there's more trauma on top of it, and there's layers of trauma. So each generation, it's a bit worse, unfortunately. Some communities are not the case, but in a lot of remote Indigenous communities, and there's this thing that I don't know, I've sort of termed sort of hidden imperialism, you know, and that is this, where white people think that they're doing a good job. You know, they're going out there and they're imparting all this stuff and they're changing things and they're providing education, or they're providing this or whatever they think they're providing. But in fact, they themselves are still back in the days where they had missionaries that came in and you know, brought their Christianity, whether it was Catholicism, Anglican, whatever. And they still, which was a period where really people treated Indigenous people as children, you know. And often today, still that's the case, that they think they can't see it even. There's no sort of self-awareness, but there's just so ingrained this imperialist sort of hidden imperialism, but it's there, but it's you know, but they don't see it. That's the tragedy of it, is the white fellas don't see it. But of course, Indigenous people know it, and they try and work around it. But I mean, there's all the whole things of dispossession and dehumanizing. But I'll just give you one example in terms of bilingual schools in the Northern Territory and across Australia. As I said before, we've got a federal system there. So the federal government gives the states and territories, you know, funding for education. Now, there was all this uproar about remote Indigenous communities. Oh, they can't speak English. You know, their NAPLAN tests, which is their testing to see what their reading and writing skills are like, are really bad. And what we've got to do something about. There's an out every couple of years. There's a big health report, goes to Parliament. Everybody gets up in arms. Oh, it's dreadful what's happening there, but then nothing happens. Nothing changes. So, and this time the federal government said, no, we're going to have every school in the across Australia speak English. Not going to speak language. They're going to come in and speak. They've got to speak English for 4 hours a day. Well, that's just about most of the school day anyway. They've got to speak English. So they sent out this team of people into all of these communities and to all these bilingual schools, which were doing better than any of the other mainstream schools, and said, no more bilingual schools. It's all going to be speaking English. I mean, that's colonization. That, you know, and that was disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. This is only in 2008 this happened. This is recent. That's recent in the history, really. 2008, 2009. So a lot of these bilingual schools were just, you know, had to become mainstream and to the detriment of the kids' education. So, you know, things like that still happen all the time. You know,
I think the viewers who may not know a lot about Australian history,
yeah,
just to remember that when the supposed Captain Cook explorer came here in 1744 or whatever, 1780, they declared Australia terra nullius, and that term means there is no one here, this is no one's land. So Indigenous peoples were seen as flora and fauna, no different to the animals jumping around on the ground.
And that's in the Constitution. So, I mean, we've got
Much
a
to our
really,
shame.
yeah, we've got a pretty shocking history of this, you know. And
Yes.
of course they declared it to be terra nullius so that they could then march in and take all of the lands without any, you know, of course. So, you know, and there's still that dispossession, and there's still the suffering of mobs. You know, we've got over 200 languages in Australia. You know, and a lot of people, for example, when we're in Tennant Creek, a lot of we call them grey nomads, the white fellas that come through after they retire, they get their big van, they're, you know, living caravan. What do you call them, caravan? Yeah, and then they come through. They go, oh, we'll go through the territory and we'll go to Uluru and we'll see all these sites. They came through Tennant Creek, and we happened to be at the supermarket that day, and these grey nomads were saying, oh, what, they're speaking another language here. I kid you not. They had no idea that in Australia, you know, there are so many different languages, so many Indigenous languages. I mean, that's colonisation, not telling people, people not knowing even that people exist. It's sort of like terra nullius today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the real truth is only, oh, sorry, Tash, I'll just be quick. The real truth is only just starting to be told in schools about.
Yes.
Yeah. And we need a movement of truth-telling. We really do.
Yes. Yes, there is that happening. We went to a play in Brisbane, and it was it's called "Is That You, Ruthie?" And it was a shocking story. But unfortunately, I wish I could talk about that play. But I wanted to ask you another question. You mentioned walking in two worlds. Tell us briefly how you yourselves walk in the Indigenous worlds in which you have worked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trying to learn some language so that we are being respectful. You know, people are trying to speak English. In fact, many people in one community, for instance, Maningrida, I think, in the far north, there's 11 or 12 languages and language groups.
Well, in Tennant Creek, there's 11 languages.
Maybe 15 up there. Yeah. But anyway, people are speaking all of those languages. You know, so to be respectful and for me to learn a few words is a good start. And, there's so many things.
Oh, so many things. I think walking in two worlds, it's like when we walk through, for example, establishing this board, assisting the local Indigenous community at Gumbalanya to establish this board, it's about, about contextualising. For example, I'll just give you an example. Like in a board, you know, you have the calendar, the financial calendar for the year. So you have annual budgets and you have monthly meetings, all this sort of thing. So what we did there was not to just say, look, these are the requirements under the law to have a board that you're going to run. These are the requirements financially. And by the way, they were the most fantastic financial interpreters. They were really very skilled by the time it was finished. But anyway, so what we started doing was we said, well, what about your calendar? How does your calendar work? You know, the wet season, the dry season. So they put up this big graphical representation of the Gunwinku seasons, the wet season, the dry season, and we superimposed what the financial board calendar on top of that. So, for example, when the emus lay their eggs, that's when you have the annual budget. When the rivers are at their height, when the floods are at their height, the wet season's at their height, this is when you have the audit, etc. So that all made perfect sense. So walking two worlds is about really thinking to how can this be contextualised? How is our knowledge going to be merged with this knowledge to make sense of it? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. That's
and with and unpacking words, you know, Ballanda whitefellas words that they may never have had any concept of in Gunwinku language, for example, or Gunwinku culture, like policy. You know, we spent a couple of hours unpacking the word policy because that was a word that was unfamiliar to people. And we did that
Yeah.
time and time again, you know?
And
Well, you
I
know,
guess, and I was just going to say something quite different. Walking in two worlds for me meant being led, doing as I was asked, doing as I was invited. Like, for instance, my skin family, one time when I was out bush, there was a death in the family. And so I was asked, come on, this is your uncle who has passed. This is what you do. And without much direction, but I did it, I was invited to come into Sorry Camp and stay there the night with the family. That meant sleeping on the ground on some pretty ordinary old mattresses around the campfire in the red dirt with the dogs sleeping beside me and sitting around the campfire and gathering food and making food and showing our respects. So that was an invitation to me to be walking in both worlds. And I don't know that I understood everything, but I did as I was expected to as a member of that kinship system family. And it was beautiful and an honour.
yes,
That's walking.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's walking in the beauty way, Hojo, in our culture. So the last question I'd like to ask you this evening is the word ancestrality. She whispers me through. What does that mean to you? And you can both answer it if you'd like.
She is whispering us through.
She is whispering us through.
Well, it's interesting because I don't have an Indigenous ancestry. My ancestry is Danish English. I've been invited into my family, so I have an ancestry, if you like, through my skin family, and yet I don't have Indigenous blood as such. But I really loved what you just said about she's whispering me through, because
that's very moving, Tash.
my skin mother whispers me through still today after she has passed. And I have had people who have seen her standing beside me. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And that's the same with my skin mum too. And I think we've talked about the thousands of years of culture and the ancestors, the many, 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 many generations that have gone before, and that glimpse, that just having the privilege and the honour of being able to being invited into that, but knowing that there's just a glimpse of that. But I feel it. That whispering is a beautiful word to use for it, isn't it? Because I feel Millie, who's also passed, I feel her whispering to me today.
No,
You're British?
But I'm British. My ancestry is British,
yeah,
Scottish, French.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I've got my grandmother. She's passed in the spirit world just over 4 years ago, and she never learned a word of English. And I see her, I feel her, I'm walking with her, and she sometimes screams me through sometimes, because she's in me forever. So thank you so much. And I'd like to take this moment to just let you know that our beautiful Elena, who comes from your parts of the world as well, we're so blessed to have her here as our executive director for Indigenous Ways, has a few words she'd like to share. So I'll pass it on to Elena. Thank you so much for Elena for running the back end.
Elena's a neighbour. She's just over the sea.
Hey, thank you so much, Julia and Julianne. I've got to say, I really believe in this session that you have uncovered the elixir of life. Before I uncover what that is, I just want to thank you both. I just feel so blessed in meeting you. Yeah. And, I do want to say I was invited to a venue yesterday that I didn't particularly want to go to, but I knew I needed to support this person. So I don't know if anyone has ever been in that position. And so off I went. And this woman who was passing through town just wanted to address a few things. And it was something that I had been thinking about for a very long time, but I wasn't able to articulate it. And you actually articulate it. So I've been processing for the last 24 hours, and you really hit it on the head. And what it is the daderi, the deep listening. And when I say deep listening, it is the interconnectedness of what Tash talked about within the listening to the lands, the rock people, our water, our winged ones, the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, and that, and I'm going to use this, the integrational wisdom that you have been blessed and opened into because of 60,000 years of wisdom and knowing. They saw you before they knew you were coming, to bestow all of this information. And, in this time, we're in this extraordinary time at the moment, globally, we're seeing this incredible collapse of Western world, Western ideals. And the question becomes, do I want to keep perpetuating the institutions that I've come from, whether that be the education, the family institution, the religion, the educational, it goes on and on and on, or really rely on this inner knowing? And the inner knowing is the deep listening, the daderi. And I can't thank you enough for when we're talking about ally and our allyship and this extraordinary experience of what you've just bestowed with us tonight, and just a blimp and an eye blink of your extraordinary lives. That lies, I think, the solution to many, many things. And am I doing the power over of wanting to be on top in my institutionalized of oppression? Or am I really willing to trust in that inner wisdom, the integrational wisdom that has always been there? And so I cannot thank you enough for
Look,
this.
we're
It's
so honoured to.
a lot of full circles for me from this place I didn't want to go to, but then I just lit up like a Christmas tree of stuff that I knew, but I didn't know how to articulate. Then having you both share your experiences through this extraordinary doorway that was waiting for you to step through and to be embraced by your families.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elena. That's really wonderful. Thank you for saying that. That's really means a lot.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is go into what is going to be happening coming up. So thank you for everyone and being here. We want to see you this time next month, which is the third Wednesday, the November the 20th. We have the incredible Desbar, who is from the Ute clan. She may look familiar to you because she's been on many, many, many films and series, including Dark Winds. There's a whole slew. She's also a proud member of the SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, and the Writers Guild of America, the WGA. So she'll be blessing us next month, and November is the Native American Heritage Month. So we're very excited to embrace Desbar. So I know you would have enjoyed the beautiful Julia and Julianne, and you can also share their wonderful archive. And this went very, very quickly because there are so many more questions, but this was just the tip of an iceberg where you can share with your friends in the next 48 hours. Julia and Julianne, who will be in our archives on our website, IndigenousWays.org. If you go to our events page, you'll see not only the Wisdom Circle where we are, but also the over 200 presenters in our video library. So you'll be able to take them. So please be sure to share them. If you're watching on all our social media, please like or subscribe to our pages that are across the screen. Or if you are going to our website, would love you to go to our IndigenousWays.org website and subscribe to our pages, and also join our newsletter. We also want to thank our ASL interpreters. We have the beautiful Raylin, and also you saw Mariah making access available to all. This program, our Indigenous Ways Wisdom Circle, has been kindly sponsored by the City of Santa Fe Arts and Culture. We're also very, very honoured to have many of our board members and our individual donors who have made this possible. If you're able to donate, you can go to all of the pages that you see beside me to keep this program going for this incredible wisdom as you have seen this evening. So in saying that, you know, we are way over the top of the hour. So I want to just take this time to thank each and every one of you for beaming in, whether that be the recorded show or watching live. Want to give another shout out to our interpreters, Mariah and Raylin, and making this possible. We'll look forward to seeing each and every one of you this time, same place, same channel, November the 20th, 6 to 7 Mountain Time in the evening. Otherwise, please, let's give it up for the one and the only amazing, encouraging walk of what they've been doing and their allyship to all. Let's give it up for Julia and Julianne.
Thank you very much.
Touch the earth.